Hello everyone around the world. Welcome. Bienvenidos, que Carlos irte, to Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I'm your host, Lauren Battistini, color consultant, artist, language learner, and world traveler. Join me each week as I chronicle the most colorful people, places, and experiences I encounter off the beaten path, both near and far. So, let's go. Vámonos, que pame. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode, actually a Season 1 recap of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. It is a pleasure to have you here. Those of you who have been tuning in for the other 21 episodes may wonder where I have been. Well, I needed to take a small hiatus, finish processing Season 1's videos, and thanking all of the guests who so graciously gave of their time. And so today is simply a wrap-up of Season 1, as well as a discussion and kind of a preview of Season 2 and things to come for this podcast. I want to thank each and every individual around the world at this point because you've listened from every habitable continent around the world. I'd like to thank you all for your listenership. Thank you for spreading the word about this fantastic podcast. What makes it so fantastic, it's not because it was my idea, it's not because I'm the host. What makes this podcast truly fantastic is the great cast of guests I've had. These are people who are so insightful, culturally informed, come from very diverse backgrounds. Typically, they're very multicultural, in many cases multilingual. They have very interesting perspectives and professions, and that's why they were selected as guests. So I'd like to give a little recap of what we were able to accomplish in Season 1 of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I mentioned we were listened to across every single habitable continent around the world. I exclude Antarctica from that because, well, there are not that many people in Antarctica. And it's not all that habitable. But we did have listeners from 28 countries and 155 cities. So let's list for fun the 28 countries from which we had listeners. The United States, of course, with about 79% of my listenership. The rest is from the other 27 countries, including United Kingdom, Canada, Netherlands, Japan, Spain, Australia, Switzerland, Taiwan, Russian Federation, South Korea, Israel, Norway, Brazil, Peru, Italy, Finland, Czechia, South Africa, Greece, of course, Greece. Yes, my second home. India, Indonesia, France, Singapore, Germany, Malaysia, Turkey, and Chile. I will not list out all 155 cities from where we had listeners tune in. So, and another thing I wanted to tell people here on the podcast is what started out as just an audio podcast is now slowly but surely being converted over to video, long form on YouTube. That's there's a learning curve involved in that. I've got my audio editor, Danny. Everyone has probably heard of him. And Danny's been so patient with me. He does all of my behind the scenes technical work. And I'm using a new platform called Riverside. And so I'm planning on uploading all of these podcast episodes to Riverside, then to my YouTube channel. And so at the conclusion of Season 1, we had about 500 or so downloads. I think we're up to maybe 518. So what has impressed me so much about this podcast is, and I'm not tooting my own horn here, I'm saying what's been so impressive about this outreach is that it followed the trajectory of what my goals were for the podcast, which really I wanted to have a predominantly U.S. American audience with other English speakers around the world. And I wanted to have this listenership, this audience all around the world. I wanted to interview predominantly non-U.S. American guests. And that's exactly what happened. Everything really went according to plan. And I was very happy about that. It was just much to my surprise and delight that that's how we were able to wrap up Season 1. So now that you have a little bit of a recap of what we did in this past season, now let's talk about how we're gearing up for Season 2 and where my focus will shift ever so slightly. Where in Season 1, I was talking to guests from other parts of the world predominantly. Season 2 will be a huge focus on the colorful, international, flavorful, multi ethnic community that we have right here in Houston, Texas. And some of you may know that in the year 2026, which is coming up right upon us in a year and a half or so, we are going to be hosting some of the World Cup games. And so Houston is having a really big push right now in tourism. We have people visit us from all over the world anyway. But with this 2026 World Cup in mind, I wanted to shift focus for season 2 and introduce all of my guests from around the world to this beautiful, magnificent city of Houston, where, quite frankly, you can experience food, flavor, culture, customs from almost every other part of the world. It's situated right here in Houston. So, Houston, Texas will be a huge, major uh, center, the focal point of the podcast for season 2. I'd like to send an open invite to any of my Houston based guests who may be interested in interviewing with me for this podcast. Please make yourselves known. I'm very interested in talking to people who can share some of their experiences with about life here in Houston, maybe some of your travel experiences. If you have a particularly interesting career path, be it in the arts or in the food industry or in some just interesting area, some kind of profession that maybe we wouldn't think of, something that's a little bit different. Or if you speak multiple languages, I always love to talk to people and pick their brains about how they go about learning languages. If you are, and we see this a lot here in Houston, if you are first generation US American, but you come from immigrant parents, an immigrant home, I would love to hear your whole family's history and how you all came to Houston, the circumstances around which you arrived, how you've melded your parents' culture with Houston Southern culture. So I will be interviewing guests such as restaurant owners, perhaps people who are steeped in the music community, the arts right here in Houston, people who are responsible for economic development, perhaps. And who knows, maybe politicians as well. I'm really not quite sure. The future remains to be seen, and I always have a great lineup of guests. So we're in July right now, and I'm going to be taking the next couple of months to brainstorm and solidify my guests and begin my list of guests and begin interviewing people. And so I didn't want you all to think I had dropped off of the map, off the proverbial map. I have just been so focused on lots of different areas of life, wrapping up season 1 of the podcast, doing some work for my company, LFB Color Consulting. Small segue here. I own an architectural color consulting firm whereby I specify colors and materials and finishes, everything from paint to wallpaper to plumbing and lighting fixtures on both residential and commercial properties. So I have a whole shift going on in my business where I'm exploring some new avenues there and sort of revamping my brand just a little bit. I have a lot of things going on in my career and personal life. And so it's just been a time of busyness and evaluation and shifting gears a little bit and pivoting to a degree. I feel like I'm the queen of the pivot, you guys. I'm always pivoting in some direction, work-wise or in my personal life. So, last year, one of my episodes, you may recall, I talked about 2023 being kind of a sabbatical year for me. I wound up traveling 11 out of the 52 weeks. It was a very meaningful and unexpected type of year for me. And I gleaned a lot of wisdom and creative ideas and new partnerships and potential collaborations and relationships through that sabbatical year. But this year, the remainder of this year, I'm really not planning on doing any international traveling. I'm planning on staying put right here in Houston. And I want to say give you a tour of the city, but it's not going to be a tour like you've seen before. This is where we really tell the multi-layered narrative of Houston, its people, the fabric of this beautiful city. For those who are new to this podcast, or may not have heard it when I mentioned it before, I'm actually a native of New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm a New Orleanian. It's one of the first things I tell people. And so I'm very proud of that. Maybe I'll do, as part of season 2, a little segue and discuss New Orleans as well, do a little tour of New Orleans. But I have been in Houston now for 23 years, and I have loved it, and I've made it home. I don't plan on leaving. So I am so anticipating a fantastic informative, very rich, uh, entertaining season 2 of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. This leads me to my third and final kind of talking point for this episode here. As we wrap up season 1, I want to talk to you about my mission and my aim of this podcast and the future of it, where I see it going. Only God knows, but I really want to at least send it in this one direction in particular, which is, as I move forward in this podcast, I really want it to be an educational experience for you. We all in this world have only 24 hours in a day and just a couple of hours a day, maybe at best, of free time to use doing whatever recreational thing we want to do. So anytime you tune into this podcast, my goal is going to be that you walk away having learned something about the world around you, some travel experience, some cultural perspective that you might not have considered previously, some interesting career path, some new language learning tip, something about the world around you that will ultimately make it seem like an even more colorful place to you. Here at Coloring My Way Across the Globe, I'm all about not just literal color, but metaphorical color. I want you all to have colorful lives. And I've said this all along, but the mission in chronicling the most colorful people, places, and experiences I encounter, the mission really is to inspire you to have your own colorful experiences, to encourage you to take that leap and do something in your life that's new and fun and interesting and adventurous, and to, in some certain ways, through my guests and our interviews, teach you how to do that. And for one person, a colorful life will simply be touring their city and finding new restaurants off the beaten path. For another person, living a colorful life might be taking that trip to Italy you always wanted to take and studying Italian on Duolingo. Living a colorful life is going to mean different things to different people. But what is most important to me is that you glean from these podcast episodes education, and that it will have been time well spent for you. I don't want you to just feel like your time was wasted when you tune into one of my podcast episodes. And that is why I do so much research on my guests, and I kind of pre-interview them before we ever take the stage and have the official podcast recorded. So those are just some of the insights that I have for you all about Coloring My Way Across the Globe and the direction we're taking for season 2. I do not have an exact launch date for season 2, but I'm imagining it to be, I would say, by September 1st, if not at the very latest, the end of September is when we will launch season 2. So I am always open to feedback. If you all have any questions, any suggestions, any ways that you feel I could improve this podcast, if you have guests you'd love for me to interview, I am always open to those suggestions. I highly appreciate hearing from different people and different perspectives. I'm talking about people of all different ages, ethnicities, religious backgrounds, political backgrounds, just different perspectives. I want people on my podcast who are going to teach us about something different from what I myself and from my individual perspective would share with you. So this is a wrap of season 1. I encourage you, if you haven't, to go back and listen to the 21 episodes. I think it was 21 episodes that we launched for season 1. And I want to, in particular, really thank Danny Goldman of Bolero Tech, who I really, without him, I would not have been able to launch this podcast. Danny is an integral, behind the scenes part of this podcast, and I simply would not have been able to publish any of these episodes and get this podcast off the ground were it not for him. So, and I'd also, again, like to thank my guests. And thirdly, I would love to thank all of you listeners. I can't wait to see you for season 2. Be sure to visit my website, which is www.l, F like Frank, B like boy, color, which is COLOR.com, www.lfbcolor.com. And this is where you will find some of the latest about not just what's going on with my business, but what's going on with my art that you might know I do, as well as the pending launch of season 2 of the podcast. And until we meet again, guys, don't forget, stay colorful. I will talk to you soon. Take care, guys. God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation, and we would love to stay connected with you throughout the week. The best way to connect is by subscribing to our newsletter at www.lfbcolor.com. That's www.l as in Lauren, F as in Frank, B as in boy, color, COLOR.com. Also, you may find us on Instagram using the same handle, LFB Color, for the latest stories, podcast guest profiles, travel photography, language learning diaries, and my own colorful art. Hope to see you there, friends. Thank you again.